Hey, so today we are going to add some custom fields and custom data to a core block. And we're going to do that by using 3 different filters, 2 JavaScript filters on the block editor side, and then 1 PHP filter for when the block actually renders on the front end. So before we start, I just want to do a demo of what we're going to be building. So I was working on a site where I was using the core query loop block, just, showing a loop of posts like on an archive. So you can see it right here. And I wanted the read more text to be a button and use the core button block, but that wasn't an option because you could add the button, but it wouldn't actually link to the article. So I made a custom field for the button block called post permalink. And what this field does is it gives us the option to override the link of the block. So the default is no, it's just going to render whatever link you put into the field here. But if I say yes permalink, then when it renders the button, it's going to replace the URL of the link to the permalink of the post of whatever post that is in the, it's being pulled right now. And then I also added a third option, which is yes, do a custom field. And the idea here is this is going to pull just from a post meta field. Maybe you're using ACF and you have some sort of URL field in ACF and you want to pull from that. So you could just put in this. You could get more fancy, more advanced. There's definitely a lot of options here. So there's really just these 2 pieces of data, the option for this and whatever gets typed into here. And we're going to save those. And then on the front end, just to kind of demo it, this is the actual button. And if you take a look, I can actually click read more. And I don't know if you can see it, but in the corner, it's going to link to that actual article, which is not something you can do. And the kind of core read more text link here is just not quite as flexible as a button, where now I have my core button stuff and I can change the design and whatnot. So that's what we're going to build, and let's take a look at it. So we're going to start in our terminal because I'm going to use the WordPress create block package to set up my plugin. I don't have to, but I kind of like it because it essentially scaffolds the package.json, the plugin file, some JavaScript. It just kind of gets a bunch of stuff done for you. So we're going to use it. I'm going to type up a command real quick and we'll look at it. So I need to pass it the name of my plugin, and we'll pass it a namespace. Match that, wp-dev. And I think that's basically it. We're in the plugins directory of this website. So I'm sitting in the plugins directory. It's going to create a new folder for the plugin. It's going to also scaffold a bunch of stuff for building a block. I don't need most of it, so I'll delete kind of a lot of it, but it's still, I think, faster than creating all these files from scratch. The most important part is this WordPress/scripts package, which is going to handle the build process, compiling everything, imports, all that sort of stuff. So that's the piece that I really want. And then it also just creates some files that I don't have to go make myself. And now our build process is complete. It basically tells us we can jump into the new directory that we made and run npm start. So let's pull it open in VS Code. Okay, so here's the plugin that it built for us, example query loop. It does kind of all the stuff for us so we can change all that data as we need to. You can see here it registers a block, and in the source folder, there's kind of a block all built out. We actually don't need any of that because we're not going to register a block. So I'm just going to delete that. I'm going to open up the terminal on the side here, and I'm going to just, like it said, npm run start, and that's just going to start build process in the background. And then you can see in the source folder, it started a block for us that's named after the plugin. I actually don't need really any of this. The only thing I need is this index.js because we are going to use that as our entry point. That's kind of what WordPress scripts looks for when the build process is running. So I'm going to delete all that. I'm going to come over here. Now it's going to be mad because it can't find all of its files. I'm going to empty it out. All right, boom. Index.js is blank. I have my PHP kind of folder set up, and I have my package.json with my WordPress scripts kind of all set up for me. My dev dependencies, super handy way to get started. Okay, let's jump into our index.js. There's a few things we need to do. We need to register our custom attributes. Then we need to build out that user interface. And then finally, we need to edit the block on the front end once we have everything in there. So there's kind of 3 steps we're going to go through. So the first thing to think about is we're going to add custom attributes. This is the actual block.json file for the core button block, the one that we're going to modify. And you can see these are all the pieces of data that it saves as the attributes. We're actually just going to add our own custom attributes. So there's URL, title, text, target. We're going to add, it's basically think of it as meta or custom fields. We're going to add those to the core button block. So the way we do this is we're going to use something called addFilter. So addFilter is just like addFilter in PHP WordPress. It's a way for you to filter stuff in the block editor. So what we're doing is we're going to filter this block.json as it shows up in the block editor. Okay, so you can see GitHub Copilot's going to scaffold some things. We'll see if we want to keep it on or turn it off. This actually is the filter that I want, the blocks register block type. So I'm going to put these on new lines so we can kind of see. So this is the filter that we are going to be filtering. The second parameter is an option to basically give it like a namespace. So I'm just going to use kind of what I've been using for the plugin, which was WP Dev. And we're going to namespace this as example query loop button. That's kind of the name of our plugin. And then the third thing we get is this function right here. So I'm going to close the function. I'm going to close this just so we can kind of have everything save. And you can see that we have two basically like parameters that the filter is going to send us. So this is like, think about a classic WordPress. You get two parameters, you might get more parameters, less, but you always have to return the parameter, the first one, right? Because it's a filter. So we always have to make sure we return settings at the end of our filter, just like we would in a PHP WordPress filter. The nice thing here is we get this name. So what we can do is, you can see it's already kind of pre-filling for me. We can just check and see if the name does not equal core/button. That's the name of the block that we're trying to filter. If we're not on the core button block, just return the settings. And if we are, we're going to do some work here. So instead of just returning the settings, what we're going to do is we're going to spread those settings and basically say return all of the settings, because we don't want to change anything or remove anything from another thing. We need to like basically return the same object and spread it out, but we're also going to modify the attributes. And so we're actually going to do the same thing here where we're going to spread the attributes that already exist. We don't want to just overwrite the attributes. We want to spread out, give it back its original attributes, and then add our new attributes. And we had two things that we needed, right? We needed to add that select dropdown, like is it going to be a link or not, that kind of yes, no dropdown, and then that other custom field if they want to use a post meta field. So we'll call the first one is post link. It actually can't be a Boolean. It actually needs to be a string because we have more than two options. It's not just a true false. It's true, it's yes, no, or yes, it's a custom field. So that's our first one. Our second one is going to be called the custom field name. And this one's also going to be a string. And the custom field name is if we're pulling in a post meta field, what's like the post meta, the meta key that we're kind of pulling from. And we'll leave that as a blank default and we'll close it out. Okay. So what we're doing is we're taking our register block type. We're just adding some extra attributes, some extra custom fields to like basically the block.json of the core button block. So we can save that. That's the first thing. That's actually not going to really, I don't know, change anything as much in the UI. Like nothing happens as a result of that. It's just kind of setting the foundation of like, hey, I have two extra things I want to save. Here's a place to save them. So now let's take a sort of break from our JavaScript and let's actually enqueue this JavaScript. That's kind of the important next step, which is basically, we need to tell WordPress, hey, I'm writing JavaScript. We need to enqueue that script. So we'll make let's make a namespace so that I don't have to worry about what I'm going to name all of these. Enqueue editor modifications. The action that we're going to use is called enqueue block editor assets. So basically, this is a place where you can do WP enqueue script to here, and it's going to enqueue it anytime the block editor loads. So just a way to say like load some JavaScript for the block editor. The first thing we're going to need is our asset file. And you can see Copilot's pretty good at filling this out, and it's probably because I already wrote this plugin once, so maybe it's reading it from me. But this is also a pretty common pattern. So the asset file is something that WordPress scripts builds for you, and it sits right in your build folder. So you can see I have a bunch of the old files in here. Watch, let's just delete all those. There we go. Okay, so now there's just 3 files in here. Our index.js that we're working on, all kind of compiled and stuff. And then it gives us this asset.php, which is an array. This gets auto-generated. You don't edit it yourself, but it basically defines your dependencies and it gives you like a custom version number every time you save. So the nice thing here is it's like anytime you make changes, the version number increments. And then also anytime you import stuff from like a WordPress package, it defines it as a dependency. So it makes sure that that script is enqueued before our script is enqueued. So let's write the WP enqueue script or let Copilot write it for us. So we have WP enqueue script, just the name. This could just be the name of our plugin or whatever, just kind of the script tag here. It knows to pull it from the build/index.js file. And then here's the dependencies and the version number. And we can just say load in the footer. Why not? And there we go. Get rid of that. So we had a nice comment for our function. Okay, so now our file should be enqueuing in the back end of the block editor, but we didn't actually do anything. So let's just do a little reload, and we're going to actually open our terminal just in case we see any issues coming up. Okay, so we loaded our new script. I don't see any errors or anything. And like I said, nothing shows up because now we have to actually build that user interface like those custom fields here. Okay, so let's jump back into our JavaScript and let's work on building the user interface for that little area. So we're going to actually make a little React component. We'll call it edit, and we'll get props as a parameter from it. So the first kind of wrapper that we need, the first component, is going to be called inspector controls. So let's get that in here. So inspector controls is sort of a slot fill where, when we look at the block editor, this sidebar right here is basically called the inspector controls. And so when we're editing a block, even a core block, we can inject anything we want into this sidebar, the inspector controls, or into the block toolbar, and that's a separate component. So by starting with inspector controls, we're basically saying whatever we put in between these two brackets, once we enqueue it, show it in that sidebar in the block editor. And then we just need to import inspector controls from the block editor package. Next, we need to build the UI. So each of these little chunks right here is called a panel. And then inside the panel, you kind of have this like a row of content. So each thing can kind of be a row. So we're going to use those components from the WordPress components library to kind of build up the little building blocks of it. So we'll start with our panel body. It even wants to give us a title. The title is essentially this little text right here. What we're going to do is we're going to be nice and we're going to make everything translatable. So we'll call ours post permalink. And we're going to need to import this function as well. That's the translation function. Oh yeah, so we need to import our panel body and then our translation function. This is where we're going to get all our UI from, this components package. And if you ever want to kind of like browse it, go to Gutenberg Storybook. You just Google Storybook and Gutenberg, and you can see all the different like selects, dropdowns, modals, like all the different kind of like UI components. Okay, so we've made our panel body. And then inside of our panel body, we will do a panel row, and we will make our dropdown. So our dropdown is called a SelectControl. So a SelectControl is literally, think of an HTML like select element, a dropdown. This is just a React component from WordPress that includes a lot of things. Let's start here. We can pass it a label, which is essentially like what text do we want, for the actual label HTML element. And then we're going to pass the value of an attribute. So this is our attribute we defined right here. That's the value that's going to be for this select control. Then because it's a select, we give it some options. The options here are a dropdown. So remember our dropdown was no, yes, and yes. And so the value that we'll store will be nothing, permalink, and custom field. And we'll basically check for these values when we render the block, and that'll kind of determine what we do. And then last, we need an onChange function, like actually save the value on the change. And then I also added a little help text that's going to show up below it in like a light gray that just kind of gives more information about this field. And so we just need to define this function, this set is postlink. So when you do an onChange in these WordPress components, they usually pass you the new value, and then it's your job to write a function that sets the new value. So it's going to look like that. Props, set attributes. So you can see here that we get attributes and then we get set attributes out of this props that gets passed to us. So we can pull values and then we can set them back here. And it's, if you've ever used like use state or something in React, it's very similar. Okay, so let's save that. Let's make sure we have everything here. We need the panel row. We need the select control. Those all come from WordPress components. Yep. Okay. So let's start building out our filter to inject our UI into the block edit. So let's start with addFilter, and we'll save this for now, but this is not quite accurate, but it'll kind of get us started. Okay. Let's get these all on new lines. So the filter we're doing is editor.blockEdit. So let's look at the core block of the button block that we're editing. when you register a block, you pass it the edit function and like a save function. Like the edit function is basically all the UI when you're editing, and the save is like all the logic to generate that final like saved HTML. So the edit is really responsible for all that backend block editor UI that we talked about. The inspector controls everything. So we're actually going to be filtering this. And that's what this filter does here. We give it just our namespace. And so to run this filter, what we're actually going to use is called create higher order component. And then I'm just going to close this like that. So create higher order component will basically take our kind of React component and the block edit that's passed to us and kind of combine them together into one component. So it's kind of just like, that's like honestly like a terrible description of it, but that's like close enough to explain basically what's going to happen here. So what we're going to get, what's important here is we're getting the block edit for all the blocks, and we're going to return a function with props because we need access to those props. And then we're going to be able to check the props and make sure we're in the right block and then add ours to the block. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to check if core/button does not equal props name, just bring us back that block edit. Like just return it exactly like it is, spread all of its props back down. Like just that's all it's going to be. Return it back. Don't break any blocks that aren't the core button block. However, after that, if it is, then we're going to return a fragment where we take our edit function that we just built and defined up here, and this one, create them together as a new component and send that back out. So we're basically saying, don't mess with the block editor stuff on any other block, but on the core button block, combine our two UIs together. And because we've wrapped everything in inspector controls, it's going to know exactly where to put it. So let's save that. That should all be good. And let's see if it even loads in our front end. Doing a hard reload, uncaught reference error, create higher order component is not defined. Of course, we didn't import it. So that comes from the WordPress compose package, which is not quite like the WordPress element, but it's again, another thing that's like basically a bunch of React stuff that we're getting access to. Okay, no errors. Let's come down. Let's click on our button block. All right, perfect. So we have this field here. It's working. It's showing this. It's showing this. Everything is good. We just need to add the conditional for our custom field. So let's go do that real quick because we want a little input to pop up here. What we're doing here is we're kind of seeing if custom field is equal to this value, then show another, like render another field. If it's not set to custom field, if it's set to permalink or nothing, then it will not show it, but in this case it will. And what we're actually going to make is called a text control. And a text control is basically like a text input. So similar to a select control, it's just a text input, HTML input with a label and like a wrapped in a field set, that sort of thing. Let's also import it. Okay, and let's put in all of our parameters. Okay, so I paste it in. So we have the label, that's the custom field name, the value that we're pulling from our props.attributes, right? So we're pulling that out similar as we were doing up here. And the name of the attribute, again, is what we defined up here. So that's been added. So set custom field name, which we need to write a little function to save it on the change. And we'll just let Copilot do it because Copilot can handle that kind of basic stuff. And yep, so if we change it, the new value gets set as the attribute. And yeah, there we go. Okay, so that should be good. Once you've kind of done all the initial scaffolding, it does get a lot easier to start sticking these things in. And like, once you have this, it's pretty easy to take like a blank kind of starter of this and just, start adding custom fields. You just define the fields and then you just kind of stick them here. It actually is pretty simple. Let's do a refresh. Okay. So now if we say yes, custom field, yep, it adds our custom field name option. So let's put this back to the permalink and let's save it. So those are our two JavaScript filters. Those are the two things we need to do to render all of this. But if we were to go to the front end and reload, the button's not going to actually go anywhere because we didn't write the logic to do that. So the logic for that, we're actually going to write in PHP. So what that means is we're going to filter the block when it actually gets rendered using the render block filter in PHP. It's super handy. You can use it for all sorts of things. The thing is that because it's the PHP for when like that server side rendering happens, it will not affect the block in the back end. So like if you inspect the HTML here, it'll still show an empty link because that filter is only going to run in like on the front end of the site essentially. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing filters. Like the render block is super powerful. You can basically do anything you want to a block when it renders on the front end, and it won't break anything in the block editor, but it also won't show up in the block editor. So, you know, you kind of have to figure out where you want to do these filters. Okay, so this is going to be a PHP filter. So let's call it function filter button block render. We're going to add this to the, so we can add it to the render block filter, which would happen on basically every single block. And if I look at the definition here, you can see some of the parameters we get. We get the block content and the actual block array. So let me put those in here, block content and the block array. And let's just update this to get both parameters passed to us. And because it's a filter, before we do anything else, let's just return block content. So this would run on every single block that gets rendered. It's fine, it's handy, but there's actually a new one you can do where you say core/button. So you put an underscore and then you put the name of the block that you want to filter. And now you don't have to do that like early return, like, am I in the right block right now? So it's a way to just run the filter only on a specific block. Sweet. So the block content is essentially the HTML. Let's actually write, we can kind of get a sense. So the block content that's going to be rendered, that's the string of HTML that we're filtering, but they also give us the block array, and that's going to have everything. It's going to have like the attributes, the name, the, you know, just like the settings, like basically everything that's in like a WP block array. So what we're going to do is we're going to check for our attributes, our custom attributes that we added. And if so, we're going to make some changes to block content. We're going to check the block attributes. So when you want the actual values, this is what it saves them as, ATTRS. I'm actually not sure why, but you were going to check like block attributes will always exist, but this is our like custom field. It might not exist at all. Like maybe the block was like, maybe the filter didn't run when the block was saved or whatever. So we want to actually make sure it just exists in the first place. Then we'll check if it's set to permalink. If it's not, then we're not worried about it. But in this case, if it is, then it's set to permalink. And then we're actually going to use the new WP HTML, and it's not even going to show up in my autocomplete yet. Processor. This is how we're going to filter the final markup. We're going to use the HTML tag processor. We're going to pass it the block content. Then we have to make sure at the end, we're going to say block content equals, take our processor that we just defined and get HTML. Okay. So a quick walkthrough. We're making a new variable of the HTML tag processor with all the block content. What that's going to do is take all the HTML and actually like break it into tags and let us modify each individual tag and then spit it back out as updated HTML. So we're going to use a function called next tag. Next tag was a little hard for me to wrap my head around, but basically what next tag is going to do is it's going to run and it's going to find the next tag of whatever HTML tag you pushed. And we're looking for the link, the anchor link, right? So it's going to like basically go through the HTML you gave it and find the next instance of an anchor link. And once it has it, that's going to kind of be what P is set to, and it'll return true. If it can't find it, it'll just return false, and this if statement will not run. But if it returns true, then now basically our P is the link attribute. So or is the link tag. So then we can run set attribute. And what we can say is, I want the link value, the link destination, to be the current permalink. And because we're in the query loop and because WordPress, you know, is smart about this, like we know the get permalink will get the current permalink of wherever it is in the loop, even though you're in like a query loop block, like it's going to know. So it's going to set the attribute. We're going to also, I don't know how useful this is these days, if it's still like a thing, but you see it. So we're going to set it to bookmark because it's permalink. From what I understand, that's like not a super helpful thing as much anymore. So it's going to change those attributes. Then it's going to get that updated HTML and pass it back to the block content. So we'll save that. And then we're just going to copy and paste it and kind of do the same thing except for the custom field version of it. So I just pasted it in. So we're going to set again, like is post link. This time, is custom field the correct value? Is like that what it's set to? And does custom field name, that other text input that we made, does it actually have a value? And if so, we'll do the same thing, load up the tag processor, find the link, set the attribute. This time we're going to use get post meta, and we're going to like pass it that meta. So if you're using like an ACF field or something, you can pass the name of the ACF field and typically you'll get the value and all the same stuff. Okay. And that's essentially it. So like I said, you could do whatever you want with the block content. You can like destroy it. You can change it completely. You really have that freedom. And like I said, it only shows up on the front end of the site. So let's go back and make sure that this is actually working. And before we do, we just have to do one more thing, which is we need to, because we're using a namespace, we can just add that kind of backslash, because I forgot we're in the name space. We need to kind of like, anytime you're doing like WP query and stuff like that, and you're using namespaces, you kind of have to deal with this little extra backslash. There we go. Okay, quick reload. So now if I click on a link, it should actually populate, yep, a permalink. And so we can actually inspect this, but essentially the block, core button block, you know, it just rendered, it just changed the tag to be the permalink. It added our rel bookmark attribute. And so, you know, we could do other things. We could add a class, we could add a custom, you know, data attribute. We could do all sorts of things to get this to work, but yeah, looks like it's working. So let's do a quick kind of summary. We created a plugin. We are loading some block editor JavaScript. And the nice thing about this is, you know, you could do as much as you want, as little as you want. You could do separate files. You can really, you know, break it apart, but we're basically just loading some JavaScript into the block editor. We're doing 2 filters. We're doing one filter that's going to register the custom attributes on the block.json. And so that way that it knows like, hey, save some data for us. The second thing is it's going to inject some nice UI for us where we set our custom attributes and show them in the sidebar. And then we use a filter to kind of put all that together. And last, we went back to PHP and we used the render block filter to look for our custom field values and change the actual HTML of the block content. And I would actually note that you could maybe accomplish this with like a string replace or a regex or something like that, but HTML tag processor is just super great, super performant, definitely worth using. So I hope that that kind of inspires you to think of other ways that you can add custom fields to core blocks and not have to reinvent the wheel when you're building something out. Like I said, the button block is great because it's already got all your theme styles and it's very easy to add style variations and different things like that. So it's nice when you can actually use it in different contexts and, you know, pass it the value of a custom field or something like that. I load this on the site and then like we're using custom post types with ACF and we're just, you know, they might have like different URLs to different links out and I can just use the button and just tell it to pull it from different values. Super handy, super useful. All this code will be available on GitHub and definitely put anything in the comments if you have any questions or any issues on GitHub if you want to learn more or see other ways to use this functionality.